Hello. Sorry for keeping you guys waiting. Sorry, I was trying to get across from the other side of town to this side of town. I thought it'd be good to hop into a taxi. Little did I know I was stuck in traffic for 10 minutes. So I decided to get out and walk. So I guess welcome to tonight's Agile Auckland event. It's sort of a continuation from last, the theme of the month has sort of been about testing and Agile testing. So I guess just to open, I'd just like to say some thanks to our sponsors. So I thank Assurity, ASB, Halo Consulting for sponsoring and making these events happen. Just like to also thank you guys for coming and taking time out of your night to come join us. And I know that we'll have a very interesting topic tonight. So without kind of further ado, I'd just like to introduce Georgia. So Georgia's probably got a little bit of an introduction slide to introduce herself. So I won't say too much. Pardon? Would you like to mention Slido, Ivan?
So you see on the board there's a link to Slido, sli.do. So that's our questioning platform. So if you, during the speech, if you have any questions, please log into there and use the hashtag, the hash APN as the room. You can enter your questions and it will be saved and we can go through the questions at the end. You can also vote on other people's questions. So if someone asks a really good one, so please do vote up.
Awesome, thanks Ivan. All right, so without further ado, I'd just like to give it to the stage to Georgia. So if we could just give a round of applause for Georgia and welcome her to speak. Thank you.
I don't think this is turned on. Is this? It is. Oh, hey, awesome. I don't know. The restrooms are down the stairs. Don't know what the fire exits say. Exit, I guess. I'll be speaking for about 40 minutes and then we'll take questions. And I'm the speaker. In case you hadn't figured that out. So my name is Georgia de Pont. I recently got married, so my Twitter handle is my maiden name, which is Georgia Chun. And then we have Assurity's Twitter handle as well. I'm a senior consultant for Assurity Consulting. I've been there for over 4 years now. And I'm going to talk to you guys today about my very recent experiences as a tester in a Scrum team. So these are I thought I would, instead of doing an agenda, I thought I would point out the three kind of key messages I'm wanting to, I guess, leave you all with. So what I've discovered on in my time in a Scrum team is that it's a journey. We learn a lot about the ideal, and it is quite the journey to get there. I have all my experiences been previously in a waterfall type environment, and moving into an agile team has been quite a change to a different type of teamwork. And the final thing is that my role as a tester has changed quite a lot with that shift. So I stole this analogy from Dan, the change from a gatekeeper to a guide, and I'll be covering more about what that means later on. So a little bit about me. I went through the Assurity graduate program way back when, and it was a year. I did a 3-week induction course, and then I was put on a client site, which was a project that some of you probably have heard of called NovaPay. Yep, I was there for a year and a half, and that was kind of my induction by fire into testing. So I was there for 7 months until the go live, and then about just under a year until I left and moved up to Auckland. NovaPay was quite a traditional project. So we wrote our test scripts that were very detailed. We wrote them based on very detailed requirements documents, and they were like stacks. Maintaining these test scripts took a lot of time. Bugs could take weeks to get fixed and released back to us. Change requests were quite a laborious process. And my team was a test team, and we were quite separate from the other teams. So we had a period of time where we were 20 of us, and we sat in our own floor in the building, and a lot of the communication was done by email. The developers weren't that keen to come up the stairs and talk to us, and going down the stairs to talk to them didn't happen as often as it would when you're sitting next to each other. So we did make that move down, and we were all co-located by the end. And as I was leaving, there were some really cool lean testing techniques that were being introduced. Unfortunately, I chose to leave just before then, so I didn't get to experience that side of it. So that was kind of my very traditional beginning. And then Ports of Auckland kind of went on a bit of a journey, started quite traditional, quite waterfall, and ended up kind of quasi-Scrum is what I like to call it. So Ports of Auckland were upgrading their terminal operating system, and I was there for over 2 years. It was started very, very waterfall. Again, I was writing detailed test scripts from requirements documents. There was some co-location, but not at the beginning. There wasn't the whole team together. We put in place a very strict change request process. It was quite anti-flexibility. It was inflexible is what I'm trying to say. Halfway through, we got a new project manager, and things started to get a little bit more lean and agile, which was really great. We started writing our requirements as user stories, which was so much easier to read. We were all co-located. We started having stand-ups, and we had a visual management board, but we never made that jump to proper Scrum. And now I'm at Warehouse Finance, and this is where I'm in my Scrum team. So I've been there since, it's now been 7 weeks that I've been there, so it is very recent. And I'm going to set the scene about what Warehouse Finance is before I go into my experiences there. Oh, but before then, it'll help if I keep my notes up to date. So I luckily took the Scrum Jumpstart course that Assurity offers at the beginning of the year, so I had an idea about what Scrum was before I was placed on this project. There are the 3 Scrum roles, product owner, Scrum Master, and development in the dev team. The Scrum artifacts being the product backlog and the sprint backlog, and the Scrum events being sprint planning, daily stand-ups, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. And I'm assuming that most of you here have an understanding about what Scrum is, the time box, 2 week sprints, deliverable software at the end, the team pulls in the stories that they want, measure velocity, stuff like that. If you do know what Scrum is, can you put your hand up if you have an understanding? Okay, cool, awesome. So I mentioned this at the beginning, and I'll touch on it quite a few times throughout. It's this idea that there's an ideal way of doing Scrum which covers all of those things, and we're a new team. I joined during Sprint 4, so they were very new, and we're kind of figuring out how to get to that point on the way, and no one starts there. So the software that we're working on at Warehouse Finance is credit card balance transfers. We're the first Scrum team in the company, so Warehouse Finance is on their Agile journey, and we're the kind of trial run. As I said, I joined the team halfway through Sprint 4. We're currently in Sprint 7. Our tool that we use is Visual Studio Office, and that's where we keep our stories, the related tasks, and the bugs we find for them. We also introduced a visual management board, which is here. So it's quite simple. We just have our sprint backlog, our to-do, our in progress, and our done. We just have the stories on the visual management board. We don't have the tasks. There's other bits and pieces. We have who's away during the sprint. We have a burn down that we draw. We have our sprint goal. So that's what we have our stand-ups around. And the final thing, which is probably the most important for the context of what I'm talking about, is that we're doing this with a deadline. So our go live date is April the 12th, and we have to finish testing and regression testing by April the 8th. So that impacts how we act as a team, and it's not the ideal. Finally, what I'm going to be talking to you guys, I want to talk more about the how, not really the what. So this is just context. I'm not going to specifically mention pieces of functionality about credit card balance transfers. So I thought I would frame my talk today like a retro. So I'm going to cover what's going well, what's not going so well, and where we can improve. So this is all from my point of view as a tester in the team. A lot of the things I'm going to be talking about, we as a team have already talked about. It's not a surprise to anyone, and we're making steps to get, particularly with the what we can improve, we're making steps to improve on those things. So we'll start with the good stuff. What's going well? A question that I never really got to ask or had other people ask was, is it testable? So the consideration of what the people are delivering for test is easy for me to test, is a really novel and really nice thing that's being considered in our dev team. An example is a field being locked would really hinder our ability to create test data, and so they're not locking it until the last possible moment. Considering how we can test a story is a conversation that I don't have with the other tester, I have with the team. And that's really new for me, and I really like it. We discuss coverage, so at the end of my testing for a story, I sit down with the BA and I go over what tests I've done, if there's any outstanding questions or niggles I have, if there's anything that he thinks I've missed from a business point of view, those sorts of things. And in the more traditional projects that I've been on, I would never have the time from the BA. They were always too busy, and testing was always squished at the end, and so I often wouldn't have the time either. And it gives me the confidence that I'm testing as the business needs me to be testing, but it also gives them confidence that I'm covering the business realistic scenarios that I need to be covering. I get to choose how I structure and capture my testing, and this is something that I've never been able to do before. I used to, both projects that I've been on previously, I had to use QC, or HPALM, and that is fine, but it's detailed and it's hard to update stuff, and it's not very flexible. So being able to let the story dictate how I test as opposed to my testing kind of made the story fit into the testing tool is really refreshing as a tester. And so sometimes I use a visual model, sometimes I use a spreadsheet, sometimes if it's just a little story, I just put some comments and maybe some screenshots in the story, task, and VSO. So this is a couple of examples of some of my testing records. So top is a spreadsheet, and the bottom is a visual model. Not all of those nodes are tests, by the way. Some of them are questions or notes or information. Demo to the business. So I really like this part of Scrum. We have our reviews at the end of our 2 weeks, and we get to demonstrate what software we've delivered to the stakeholders. I did my first one on Tuesday, which was quite scary, but luckily nothing decided to not work at the last minute, and the feedback that you get from the business is great. The confidence that they get from seeing that you're delivering as they hope you are delivering, the confidence that we get that we're meeting their needs, and it really opens this communication to a wider group than just the development team. I find it really helpful, and it creates this atmosphere of feedback. With the constant chat, this is something that sometimes we had in my traditional waterfall projects, but sometimes I had days of quiet scripting, and maybe I'll spend some time updating some test scripts. Whereas we're constantly talking about the stories that we're testing, the issues that we've found, the bugs that we've found, the blockers that we have, what the priority is, what the business needs us to do. And creates a really lively atmosphere, but it also means that communication is flowing. There's no documents that have to be updated that you then have to go read and sign off. It's not a difficult process. It's a really responsive and invigorating place to be working. The visual models of the system. So we have a diagram, a flow diagram of the different stages that a balance transfer application goes through, and this has become like our Bible. It's lightweight. We can sometimes scribble on it if there's something that we think's missing. We take it for all of our conversations, and it so quickly highlights differences in understanding, which can cause bugs. There's a bit that we're kind of stuck on at the moment, and all the time we're pointing at it and figuring out what box is causing it. And it's so easy compared to a document that explains each status that it can go through. We just have this document. And I'm not saying this doesn't happen in waterfall projects, it's just something that we do quite well, I think, at the moment. We also have like a hand-drawn bit of paper with a very high-level architecture diagram, and that's been really useful as well. There was a box that we didn't know existed until the developer came over and said, this is here. I was like, well, no wonder then we have a bug. And those sorts of conversations and the tools that we can use to support those conversations make everyone's jobs easier. And a lot of what these things that are going well come back to is this idea of fast feedback, and it's something that I'm really enjoying about being a tester. So I get fast feedback when I discuss coverage with the BA. I get to provide fast feedback when I'm talking to developers or saying, come and look at this thing on my screen, it doesn't look right to me. Or when we demo to the business, we get fast feedback from them and they get it from us. So it's something, the speed of which I can provide information has dramatically increased, and I really like that. It means that I have to provide, often you have to provide good information because you're not providing lots of it at once, it's always just little bits. But you get better as you go along. Okay, now on to the what's not going so well. And luckily this is a much smaller list. Oops, that's not the list. There it is. So this was a quote from one of our retros, is that testing is the problem. And my eyes kind of widened and I was like, well, that's not a helpful attitude to have. But what he was actually trying to say is that testing is a bottleneck. And there's still this view that we were preventing stories from moving into done, that the dev does their stuff and then stories still sitting in progress because us testers are being annoying. This is going away already. This concept is leaving, which is even in the 7 weeks, whatever I've been there, which is really cool to see. We've tried a few things to make it more salient that it's the team's responsibility to get stories to done. It's not the testers that block it. We all are responsible for getting our stories across the line. It's something I think as well that happens when Scrum teams first start, is that whole mini waterfall thing. So testers can sit around waiting for a couple of days, a week, and then we get all the code, and then we have our second week where we're like rushing through. That's not happening as much, but it was a little bit when I first came on. It's just getting used to that way of quicker working, of smaller increments and getting stuff into tests so that we can start providing that feedback. I think also the idea that we can be testing from the beginning, so static analysis, sitting with the developers while they're coding, stuff like that. And the other thing that I've mentioned is Scrum with a deadline. So this has a number of impacts. We don't really get to pull our work into our sprint. We have to complete all the stories in a sprint, and that's just what we've been told. And that's not helpful in a way. That puts a lot of pressure. Things like our sprint retro gets shorter, our Sprint review was much shorter this time, and we're not being asked to work overtime or anything yet, but we are feeling like, I'm feeling like I did at the just before go lives on waterfall projects, which is that squish. And that's not really supposed to happen with Scrum. I think that the trouble with this though is that we're the first Scrum team in the business. So they're still getting used to this way of working. Marketing has a whole campaign that's waiting to go. The business is still kind of getting its head around the idea of no deadline for a project. So it's something that won't always be there, but it is at the moment. The other thing that I haven't actually got up here, but because I wasn't there when it happened, but it started, for the first few sprints they did this, they asked people to be, in the dev team, they asked people to be Scrum Masters. Without really much, I don't think there was much awareness about what a Scrum Master's role was, or if that person wanted to be one. So it took a while before people, I think, realised the importance of the role and that not just anyone can do it. We now have a dedicated Scrum Master, and that's definitely helped. They facilitate our daily stand-ups, our reviews and our retros, and they help remove blockers, and it's useful having someone who's just protects us from all possible interruptions to our work, particularly with the deadline. But that hasn't happened when I was there. That was before I got there. Okay. So what can we do better? This is the stuff that we're looking to improve on. We have a few retro items that we've taken out of our retrospectives, the stuff that we know we need to do better. So one of the things we wanted to do was talking to the board more. So we realised that in our daily stand-ups, we talk about our tasks and bugs, but we don't talk about the story. So people get quite focused on what's in their queue and what they do, and lose sight of us as a team working to move stories into done. And that's why we only have stories on our visual management board. We want to bring the focus back to the story, and that us as a team all have joint responsibility for it. I think it's working really well as well. It's definitely improved our stand-ups. Another action that came out was discussing the story with the developer, the tester, and the BA before coding starts. This isn't done that consistently, but when it is done, it's really helpful because there's always a little bit of misunderstanding around what the story is, or some sort of scenarios that haven't been considered, or the tester tests it one way and the BA meant it a different way. So even though it's all in the ticket in VSO, it doesn't take away the need for this sort of conversation. And whenever we do that, that's really helpful. So our point is to get that happening every time. And finally, in one of our retros, it was made clear that some of our dev team were being asked to do work on other projects, so we didn't actually have all of their time. And we've made an action to escalate to our product owner when the projects, when people were asking our dev team members to do this. And then more generally, our user story format isn't consistent. We don't always do I want so that. That's right, isn't it? Yeah. Sometimes we had one that was just called like validation API. Another one had the as a I want, which looked good, but it's caused a whole lot of issues, and I don't know why it's important. It doesn't have the justification, the so that part of it. And is it the most important thing, or is it a nice to have? So it's a conversation that we had to have with the BA afterwards. It's something that I think we're realising the importance of the more we come across those that don't fit that format. I've found it really easy I really enjoy the format because it makes me really aware of the business value of that story and why we're doing what we're doing. Automation. So you may have noticed I haven't mentioned automation at all. I don't come from a very technical background. I don't write code. I can read databases and search SQL and stuff like that, but we don't have any automated tests at the moment. And a lot of people consider Agile testing and a Scrum team to be, automated testing, and that definitely has its place. I know that you guys talked about the automation pyramid last time, and I was talking to one of the guys in my dev team before I came here, and he was like, oh, you're going to talk about automation? I was like, yeah, I figured that we just didn't do it because the initial investment, the hump of pain to put the time and effort into automating our tests was too great given our deadline. And he's kind of said, oh yeah, but also it's the type of software that we're using is quite difficult to write those unit tests for, and we don't want to have a top-heavy automation pyramid where we have all these fragile end-to-end tests that have to be updated all the time. So it's a competency that they're looking to do in the next project. It's one that we don't have at the moment. That being said, we did automate our deployment, which cut down our time by a couple of hours. So it used to be like 2-3 hours, and now it's about 30 minutes. And that's really sped up our testing as well. We don't have a definition of done. We've talked about that in our last retro. Basically, it just means that we kind of have an informal one where it's been tested and passed, but that's not really a definition of done. Each story has its acceptance criteria, but that's story specific and not an overall definition of done. It's something that, again, we're working towards. We are constrained by time, unfortunately, and I think the next project is something that we as a team will come up with our definition of done before we embark on that sprint. Our sizing of stories. So we don't really size our stories. We don't play planning poker. We don't use t-shirt sizes. We estimate our tasks based in hours, and that kind of is the default size of the story. It's not, I think this does us a lot of harm because we have no idea what we're getting through in a sprint. We can say that we completed X amount of stories, but that doesn't really tell us anything if we don't know the size of the stories. So our burn down chart is stories, and that's quite meaningless when you don't. It's okay. It's okay. We're on the journey, but it's quite meaningless when it comes to knowing how much work we can commit to. That being said, we don't get a choice in how much work we can commit to because we have to complete all the stories. So it's kind of a catch-22. We don't know our velocity, but we kind of couldn't use it even if we did. So these are all things that we're all aware of and we all want to get better at, and we're working through it as a team. It's quite a big list. And it comes back to that idea that I said at the beginning, that we're on the journey. We're never going to be perfect from the beginning, and I think no team would ever be perfect from the beginning. We're all adjusting to this way of working. And the last thing I wanted to do to kind of wrap up is, and I've touched on these a few times, is the differences that I've noted between my experience as a tester in a waterfall project to being in a Scrum team. So this idea that no testing tool is dictated, I really, really like that. Being able to choose based on what the story is, how big it is, the type of testing that I need to do, it makes my job a lot easier. Usually the tools I use are much easier to update as well, so the maintenance overhead is like this big, and I really have to do much of that anyway. The consideration of testing from the whole team, so previously the test team only kind of really considered testing, and the dev, when we were very separate, and now we're all together, and the devs in our team have to think about testing as much as I have to think about testing. So we're slowly getting seen not as a blocker, but as the people that help them get the stories done. A question that I must have asked myself this, but I don't really remember doing it that much, was when I stopped testing. So in a waterfall project, you kind of just were so busy at the end that you just did what you kind of could in the time that you had. Whereas I think now, because we have such a short amount of time, not like a short amount of time, but our time is kind of split into measurable chunks, I have to consider the value that I'm providing with how much time I'm spending on testing a story. So what's the business getting out of me testing all these extra scenarios? Is it worth it? Or could I be doing something that's more valuable? And this is where me coming and getting the BA to look at what I've done so far has been really helpful. So I get a better idea of where that value kind of line is. The other thing is with a waterfall project, because our timelines were often so long, you know, I was at a project for 2 years, it's hard to get that perspective of value for money and value for time, and something that's much more salient in a Scrum team. Code as you need it. So there's another tester that's on the project in the team with me. We get to pull code as we need it. So we don't get told what's been delivered. We get to ask when, like, obviously it has to be ready, but we get to say, oh, we're not ready for that yet, we've got this, or that's going to impact my testing of this, so can you hold off? And these conversations are something that I'm really enjoying, and I didn't have to this extent in previous projects that I've been on. Sustainable pace-ish, so we're getting there. I quite enjoy having things broken in this way. It means that we achieve bit by bit as opposed to everything being smushed at the end. Obviously, we can get better at this, but it's better than I have experienced it. And again, this idea of fast feedback. So all the feedback really from me used to be at the end, and it's really late at that point. That's why change requests were so kind of detrimental. Everything had been done. So then to go all the way back, it was seen as something that was a real pain. And now it's not at all. It's just good information that people want to know. So that's from tests, but also from the business. If the business wants to change something, it is not a big deal. And that's something that I've never really experienced before, that if the business wants to change, it's like, cool. Whereas before it was like, log this thing, and we'll look at it later. And this idea of a guide versus a gatekeeper, which kind of filters through all this stuff, is if you're blindfolded and you're walking 100 meters, a waterfall tester will tell you at the end that you're in the wrong place and to go back and start again. But an agile tester is your guide and tells you each step along the way whether you're on the right path. And I really like that. I think it really sums up everything that I've enjoyed about being a tester in a Scrum team. My information is valuable, and it's at the right time. And that's never really been an experience of mine before in waterfall projects. I actually have no idea what the time is. Oh yeah, I'm all right. So to sum up, Scrum is a journey. We're not in an ideal place, but no one starts in an ideal place. And I'm really proud of what the team has done, even in my short amount of time there. Shifting to this different type of teamwork. So I'm in a development team now. They consider testing, I consider development in ways that I've never been a part of before. And I really like that way of working. And my role has changed. So the feedback I provide is much quicker. And because of that, it's much more valuable. And I really like that shift in role. Okay, questions? I think there's like a format.
So maybe if we just give... Hello. So maybe if we just give Georgia a round of applause. Thank you, Georgia, for your talk. So I don't know about you, but what I loved about Georgia's talk is a lot of times you go to a lot of kind of agile kind of talks, and a lot of people talk about theory, right? But what I love about what you shared is really raw and honest kind of experience about what it really is like working in a Scrum team. And I think I've definitely learned a lot. I've learned some stuff from what you've shared, and so thank you for that. So again, I'm looking at Slido, and there's a couple of questions that have floated to the top. So I'm just going to ask you questions.
Yep, cool.
So the top vote, with 5 votes coming in, is what's your approach to regression tests?
Yep, cool. So we have a regression testing sprint where we will be regression testing, spending a week regression testing in our test environment, and then a week regression testing in our pre-pod environment. We're currently in our regression sprint, and we still have stories to complete. So we're figuring out how that's going to work. Our current plan is to try and get all our stories done this week and regression test next week. I don't know how that's going to go. we're going to be considering strategies to get that achievable. Yeah.
Yo.
No, it's everybody. We will be, yeah. They'll be supporting us. I don't know how much testing they'll be doing per se, but they'll be supporting us. We have some other testers that we've roped in as well from other parts of the business.
Awesome. I'm just going to go through, I'll ask you a question after that. That's this one. So the next one was, in a Scrum team, who is responsible for quality? I think you covered a little bit about that, but you just want to address that a little bit.
Everyone is.
Yeah.
I think I think maybe that's what I really like as well, is that it's not me, it's everyone. Because in the past, the idea of quality gatekeepers being a testing role is something that's kind of puts all the burden on us, where it's not, it's everyone in a team. And that's what's really cool about being in a Scrum team.
Jen, did you have a one that's not on this list?
No, it's just a follow-up to the original
Okay.
question, but I can wait to the end.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to pick the next one. Dev and tester collaboration. How much collaboration per day? It's an interesting question.
Like in hours? I don't know.
All the time.
We are constantly talking. I mean, I would consider that to be collaboration. Today, I spent about an hour with a dev and a BA trying to nut out this problem that we have. There's this irritating gap that we've found, and of course, it's now that we've found it. So I would say a lot of my day is spent collaborating with dev. Yeah. I mean, it will depend on the story and what the day is, but yeah, I would say quite a lot of time.
Okay. Awesome. So I know we are sort of approaching time, so I know there's quite a lot of useful questions here, but I think, Georgia, you're going to hang around for a little bit, and I know that outside we've got some food and nibbles. So if you just want to take the opportunity to just corner Georgia and ask her lots of questions, I'm sure she'll be
really
happy
friendly
to share. I think the next couple of slides, there
there's
a few
some
slides
info
around what we... so I guess just before we go off and before we break for a bit of networking, just wanted to announce the next speaker is Ruben Dunn. And so the topic of the evening is going to be Agile and DevOps, sort of friends or enemies. And I know that's sort of going to be a really interesting topic. I know a lot of organizations we're talking to, or I've been talking to, have been sort of asking, what is DevOps? We want to try to understand DevOps. Is DevOps same as Agile? Is it just a different word? So come along to that one. I think it'll be really, really interesting. So that's happening on the 13th of April, so in a couple of weeks' time. And it's going to be in the same building, I think WG 403, which is this one. Yes. Woo! And in May, we do have Ian Maple. So I don't know if you guys were here when Ian Maple came last year, but he is one of the leaders in Silicon Valley, and he is leading a company called Intuit on the Agile transformation. So he's got some really interesting stories to share about leadership lessons, transforming an Agile organization. So that's coming up in May. So we've got a couple of really, really awesome speaking events coming up. So do invite your colleagues and friends and people that you know that are interested, and do come along yourselves. I sort of want to just wrap up with thanking Jim again. Thank you so much for giving us the venue, and a lot of this wouldn't be possible with your support, and so I'd just like to thank AUT and Jim. Thank you. And I've already called out to our sponsors, so I won't call out to them again. So again, I'd just like to thank everyone for your time tonight. I hope that you got something useful out of it, and there's going to be nibbles right outside there, or up there, I see. And we'll see you guys along at the next event. See you. Bye.